And welcome back again. So today we have a treat, a very special treat. I'm going to be reading from a very nice book that I have that is titled Commentaries on the Gospel of John, chapter 1 through 8 by St. Thomas Aquinas. So yeah, we're going to be reading that today and diving into some sweet, sweet Thomas Aquinas commentary. So just, an apology and a heads up. I have this big old awkward book and I'm holding it behind a mic and, it's maybe making a little bit of noise in the background and I may have to pause a little bit as I read through the book because I'm flipping the pages. But you know what? We're going to get through this and I think it's going to be awesome. So, getting into it. Prologue. Isaiah chapter 6 verse 1. I saw the Lord seated on high and lofty throne, and the whole house was full of his majesty, and the things that were under him filled the temple. These are the words of a contemplative, and if we regard them as spoken by John the Evangelist, they apply quite well to show the nature of this gospel. For as Augustine says in his work on the agreements of the evangelists, the other evangelists instruct us in their gospel on the active life, but John in his gospel instructs us also on the contemplative life. The contemplation of John is described above in three ways. In keeping with the threefold manner in which he contemplated the Lord Jesus, it is described as high, full, and perfect. It is high. I saw the Lord seated on high and lofty throne. It is full, and the whole house was full of his majesty, and it was perfect. And the things that were under him filled the temple. As to the first, we must understand that the height and sublimity of contemplation consists first of all in the contemplation and knowledge of God. Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these things. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 26. A man lifts up his eyes on high when he sees when he sees and contemplates the Creator of all things. Now since John rose above whatever had been created, mountains, heavens, angels, and reached the Creator of all, as Augustine says, it is clear that his contemplation was most high. Thus, I saw the Lord, and because, as John himself says below, Isaiah said this because he had seen his glory, namely of Christ, and spoke of him. John chapter 12, verse 41. Therefore, the Lord seated on high and lofty throne is Christ. All right, let's pause right there for a second. So we have these classic divisions of St. Thomas Aquinas as he breaks things down for us so we can understand them better. And he says, okay, the other Gospels look at Jesus as in his humanity and looks at his active life and what he does. But the Gospel of John particularly, as he quotes Augustine, is looking into the contemplative life of God. And so when we look at this, we have to note that, hey, we're going to see something different than we see in the other Gospels. We're going to see a lot of theology, more so than we see with the other Gospels. It's not going to be Jesus going to here to heal this person because we're learning about Jesus' humanity. It's going to be Jesus is going to do something particular because he has some very deep and prophetic reason behind his actions. So with that moving forward, we describe it as three ways. We describe it as high, we describe it as full, and we describe it as perfect. And what's going to be important as we go through this is the passage from Isaiah, which is, I saw the Lord seated on high and lofty throne, and the whole house was full of his majesty, and the things that were under him filled the temple. That's going to be important because this is going to be our mnemonic bookmark that's going to help us remember everything that we're about to get into here. So, all right. I'm going to stop there except for one more note, and then we'll get back into it, and that is, all right, when talking about, anybody can contemplate things, right? There are many beautiful things worth contemplating, too. I mean, space is full of them. And what Thomas Aquinas has to say is that, okay, since John is a contemplative and contemplating God, he is contemplating the most worthy thing, because out of all the beautiful things, God is the most worthy to contemplate. So everything we see has a beginning and God. So with that, I'm going to return back now to the commentary. Now, a fourfold height is indicated in this contemplation of John, a height of authority. Hence he says, I saw the Lord on high. I saw the Lord. So I'm going to restart that. All right. Now, a fourfold height is indicated in this contemplation of John, a height of authority. Hence he says, I saw the Lord. A height of eternity, when he says, seated. One of dignity or nobility of nature. So he says, on a high throne. And a height of incomprehensibility, of an incomprehensible truth, when he says, lofty. It is these four ways that the early philosophers arrived at the knowledge of God. Some attained to a knowledge of God through his authority, and this is the most efficacious way. For we see the things in nature acting for an end, and attaining to ends which are both useful and certain. And since they lack intelligence, they are unable to direct themselves, but must be directed and moved by one directing them. And, turning the page, taking some time, and who possess an intellect. Thus it is that the movements of the things of nature toward a certain end indicates the existence of something higher by which the things of nature direct to an end and governed. And so, since the whole course of nature advances to an end in an orderly way and is directed, we have to posit something higher which directs and governs them as Lord, and this is God. His authority in governing is shown to be in the word of God when he says, Lord. Thus, a psalm says, you rule the power of the sea, and you still the swelling of the waves. Psalm 88, verse 10. And through, as though saying, you are the Lord, and govern all things. All right, pause again. So, we have the first thing that we're going to focus on when it comes to contemplation, right? We have the three things, the height, the fullness, and the perfection. So the height, as we are coming to understand, is understanding what in essence it is that we're contemplating. And when particularly talking about this, there are four main ways that the early philosophers come to know God. And that first thing is authority. Like, I saw the Lord. That's our mnemonic. I saw the Lord, his authority. And in this way, we see authority as a director, as one who has the authority to direct things. And I think this is pretty cool here, right? So we see that our first example is that, the things of this world, of this earth, of everything around us, it moves, and it moves in an orderly fashion. But a lot of things have no intellect, right? Rocks do not have an intellect. Plants have no intellect. Grasshoppers don't have a brain, only a nervous system. So we see a lot of things that don't have a mind to reason to make them move in an orderly way, yet they move in an orderly way. Now let's take a step there and think, okay, what is an orderly way? What do we mean when we say orderly? Well, coming from, a perspective of chemistry, let's look at just a chemical reaction, one that we can all know and love, fire. Fire is rapid oxidation, right? And it will happen the same way every time if you do certain things, right? You put enough activation energy in there, you start a rapid oxidation process, and you're going to have a fire, provided you have all the things you need, oxygen, fuel, and oxygen, fuel, and energy, an ignition source. Yeah, sorry there. Forgot my fire triangle. Embarrassing. So, okay, bringing it back, reeling it in. So I would say, like, in this case, like in modern science, if you divorce it from theology, it's like, okay, we know that we have this chemical process that explains fire, which is rapid oxidation, and then it stops. And it's like, now we understand the universe. what Thomas Aquinas is saying is like a even more basic question of this is like, okay, yes, we know that we have this process that is rapid oxidation, but why is it orderly? Why does it happen consistently the same way and we can predict these things? And he says, okay, like for that to be consistent, for that to be predictable, that we can study it and that it doesn't change and it doesn't randomly like, I don't know, like you think like, why is it that like you don't just start a black hole if you start a fire? Like there's some sort of level of orderness to the universe that we can come to understand it. And that level of orderness of why is it that we can even apply the scientific method to the things around us is in itself an argument to coming to understand the Creator, which is what the early philosophers understood. It's like, hey, this world is intelligible. It is predictable. And there are things that we can come down to like a basic knowledge of the building blocks of this universe and be like, yeah, this is going to work this way. And the fact that it works in an orderly way means that there must be a higher intelligence that has made this, the creator of things, as what Augustine today is saying. Excuse me, not Augustine, Thomas Aquinas. What Thomas Aquinas is saying today. Yeah, that these things, having no intelligence yet are intelligible, must have at their root some higher power that created them and makes them intelligent, so that they act in the way that they should. Which is interesting, right? So it's like, okay, these things are dumb. They don't have any, sentient life that can, or sentient mind that can understand things. They don't know that they have to do it. They just act in the way that they were created to act. And that points towards something not random, but something intelligent. So that was long. Let's go back to our commentary. Continuing on. John shows that he knows that this about the world, John shows that he knows this about the world when he says below, he came unto his own, i.e., to the world, since the whole universe is his own. Others came to a knowledge of God from his eternity. They saw that whatever was in things was changeable, and that the more noble something is in the grades of being, so much the less it has of mutability. Mutability just being changeability. For example, the lower bodies are mutable both as to their substance and to place, while the heavenly bodies, which are more noble, are immutable in substance and change only with respect to place. So pausing there, probably talking about angels saying like, hey, their substance and what they are doesn't change. It'll always be eternal, but their place and where they can be moves. All right, going back to it. We can clearly conclude from this that the first principle of all things, which is supreme and more noble, is changeless and eternal. The prophet suggests this eternity of the Word when he says seated, i.e., presiding without any change and eternal. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. Psalm 44, verse 7. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8. John points to this eternity when he says below, "In the beginning was the Word." John chapter 1, verse 1. All right, so unpacking that a little bit, I feel like this one's pretty straightforward, and we can understand this a little bit easier, that like, hey, there are grades of things, and the higher you get on the level of whatever you are, the less changing you are, right? So a flower of the field, a blade of grass. In the desert, which is where I live, it can spring up and then in like 3 days it doesn't exist anymore, unless it's terrible yellow flowers that just induce allergies and pain. Then they last for far too long and it's just miserable. But going back and getting more on topic, like, so people last longer than grass normally. All right, then there are things that are like more noble than us, like planets They last for a very long time that we can predict and we can theorize, but like, man, no one's actually been around for the life and death of a planet. And then there are angels who they have no end, but they do have a beginning. So then there must be something that is the highest, that is of highest principle, the first principle, which is something that always existed. All right. So with that, let's get back to it. All right. Still others came to a knowledge of God from the dignity of God, and these were the Platonists. They noted that everything which is something by participation is reduced to what is the same thing by essence, as to the first and highest. That is a lot of words, very beautiful, but basically what he's saying is like everything that is something is participating in existence in some manner. So we're about to see the example of fires. Thomas Aquinas puts it out. So, okay, everything exists by participation in something greater than itself. That's main takeaway. Let's get back to it. Thus, all things which are fiery by participation are reduced to fire, which is such by its essence. And so, since all things which exist participate in being and are beings by participation, there must necessarily be at the summit of all things something which is its essence through its own essence, i.e., whose essence is its existence. And this is God, who is the most sufficient, the most eminent, and the most perfect cause of the whole of essence, from whom all things that are participants in existence. I think I said that wrong. All right, we're going to back that up. And this is God, who is the most sufficient, the most eminent, and the most perfect cause of the whole of existence, from whom all things that are participate in existence. Okay. The dignity is shown in the words on high throne, which, according to Dennis, refers to the divine nature. The Lord is high above all nations. Psalm 112, verse 4. John shows us this dignity when he says below, the Word was God. John chapter 1, verse 1. And with God, there was no end there. So going back, the Word was God. John chapter 1, verse 1. With Word as subject and God as predicate. Ooh, English, my bane of existence. All right, so going back to what we just came to. So another thing is, okay, everything exists by participation in something greater, can be boiled down to that greater thing, which we call essence. So the example of fire, there are things that participate in fire, but they can be boiled down to their essence. So if we take a little bit of a scientific approach and use an old example, a spark is participating in a fiery nature, but in essence, fire's rapid oxidation. So all things that are fiery are participants in that rapid oxidation. So then we, that seems to make perfect sense to me. So with that, then we say, okay, all things participate in being that exist. So imaginary numbers, I'm sorry, you don't exist. You don't include yourselves here in this conversation. You're not welcome. I'm sorry. I think that's hilarious. For all those who are not math nerds, I do apologize. But yes, so going back to it, everything which exists is a participating and just existing, right? So since everything is participating and existing, but isn't necessarily existing, in the sense of like that is its essence, there must be something which its essence is to exist. So like that famous quote that we have from St. Thomas Aquinas, that is, God is being itself, right? So he is that source of like, okay, we exist, but we die. We are born and we die. So we have this changeability to us, going back to a older example. But God, since we do exist, there must be something out there that is being itself. There is something out there that is what it means to exist fully, which is kind of cool. And we'll see, not in this, but the next podcast, a very big implication of what that means as far as God's majesty. But yeah, so existence, majesty, being, all this saying is we can ascertain that since there are things that exist, there's something that exists perfectly, and that thing that exists perfectly is what we would say is God. And moving back to our commentary, yet others arrive at the knowledge of God from the incomprehensibility of truth. Man, I just can't help myself. I'm sorry. I gotta get into it. When I first saw this, I was like, oh man, what a cop-out. Okay, the fourth way of coming to understand God exists is I can't comprehend him. He must exist. I thought that's hilarious. That's not the case. I'll give my spiel later, but let's get back to it. All things which are in... reset. All the truth which our intellect is able to grasp is finite, since, according to Augustine, everything that is known is bounded by the comprehension of the one knowing. And if it is bounded, it is determined and particularized. Therefore, the first and supreme truth, which surpasses every intellect, must necessarily be incomprehensible and infinite, and this is God. Hence, a psalm says, "Your greatness is above the heavens," Psalm 8, verse 2, i.e., above every created intellect, angelic and human. The apostle says this in his words, "He dwells in unapproachable light," 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 16. The incomprehensibility of truth is shown to us in the word lofty, that is, above all the knowledge of the created intellect. John implies this incomprehensibility to us when he says below, "No one has ever seen God." All right, so pausing, incomprehensibility. This is an interesting point that the thing that is known is limited by the thing that is knowing, right? So all right, we can, if there's something greater than we are, and there's something that is beyond us, let's say an extraterrestrial life that exists out there that is intelligent and it is beyond our intelligence, then we can't fully grasp it. And let's think of something really crazy here. Let's think of something that lives in the fourth dimension. All right. What if there's a fourth dimensional being that exists out there? Then our ability to know it is going to be so very limited that we can't completely comprehend it. And then part of it is incomprehensible to us because, we have limitations. The knowledge that we have is only so much, which can also be a lot. But it still has bounds and has ends. So if there's a first principle, if there's a thing that created us all, then it is beyond us, and its intellect is just something that we can't fully grasp. Not something that we can't understand at all, but it's not something that we can fully understand because we ourselves have limits. Now, another way that I would like to think of this also is just how does this, I guess somebody could come to this. To me, it doesn't seem like a very effective way of learning that God exists. But what about wondrous awe? The fear of the Lord, that awe of the Lord. Someone can come to understand God through that. And that in it, that wonder of just oh my gosh, what majesty, what beauty. We can even see this through just in creation itself, right? The glory and the majesty of going on a beautiful hike and just seeing everything around us, and just man, you reach the summit of a peak and you see everything below you, and it goes on for miles, beautiful, and there's an awe there because you can't take it all in. You can take part of it, but its overwhelmingness is what is beautiful. And, I mean, so it is with God. Like, he has an incomprehensible love for us. A love so great that, in the Christian religion, we see that he died on the cross for us, that he endured just absolute agony. And, like, for what? It wasn't for our goodness. It was because he wanted us to have a shot at eternal life. So we see that beautiful love, and we see what he did to come and make us close to him so that we'd have a shot at coming again and being able to dwell in eternal life. And we think, whoa, what wonder, what awe. It's just not something that is, not something that I can comprehend. That to me, I can understand as a form of incomprehensibility. But again, I talk a lot. So I'm going to go back to the Gospels of John and St. Thomas Aquinas' commentary. Thus, the contemplation of John was high as regards authority, eternity, dignity, and incomprehensibility of the Word. And John has passed on this contemplation to us in his Gospel. All right. And that's where we're going to stop today, because the next sentence is on fullness. All right, so this is awkward. I have this book that's just levitating in the air with my arms on it, and I have nowhere to put it. So, yeah, there's some really interesting things happening right now. Okay, so let's kind of compress, unpack everything that we just read. A lot there. It's beautiful, but let's go over it. All right, so we learned that the Gospel of John deals with God's contemplative life more so than his active life. So there's going to be a lot of lessons of theology where things are going to happen and they're going to seem weird, but it's because there's a specific point that John wants us to know that Jesus was making in his life that wasn't just an action of him as a human, but him teaching theology of him being God. But since this is a contemplative book, we need to understand it as such. And when it comes to this, there are 3 things that are important to know about contemplation. 1, height, which is understanding, coming to understand God and coming to understand the essence of God. So later on, we're going to see St. Thomas Aquinas say cause, understanding the essence of the cause. And then later on, when, next episode, when we talk about God's fullness, we'll see not just understanding the essence of the cause, but the power of the cause. Like, what is its effect on everything around us? All right, so either we have, just said a little bit there, we have height, we have fullness, and then the last one's going to be perfection. So there are 3 things, and only one we went over today, and that was height. So in this pursuit of coming to understand the essence of the thing that we're contemplating, there are 4 ways that the early scholars came to know God, right? Go back to the mnemonic. I saw the Lord seated on high and lofty throne. All right, I saw the Lord, his authority, seated, eternity, on high and lofty throne. Throne being his nobility, and lofty being incomprehensibility, his grandeur. So, yeah, practice that mnemonic. I saw the Lord seated on high and lofty throne, and the house was filled with his majesty, and all the things that were under him filled the temple. That'll be important. That's good. It's a lot to chew on. It's good, though, because, I read ahead a little bit, obviously, and it gets kind of weird in some points that Thomas Aquinas makes to me are just like, what are you talking about? But if you remember everything in this mnemonic and you remember that's like, oh, that's right, because you don't quite use the same language that we used. And you have words like power, which like we understand, but there's a very nuanced set definition of power that St. Thomas Aquinas uses, and essence, and all these really important things. So, man, that was good. I have no idea how long that was. So hopefully it's not too much. And I look forward to speaking to you guys again. Hope you guys are doing well, I should be better about, praying for the people that are going to be listening to this. But I try. I do. It's a little bit. I'm not great. At prayer. But I'm doing my best. So God bless you guys and have a wonderful day.